Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and welcome to this very special episode of Rotted Rankings, where I'm going to take every single film in a horror movie franchise, deconstruct it, score it, and rank it. And this time, I'm going to be tackling the Ju-on franchise. Every single Ju-on movie, every single Grudge movie will be talked about and scored here. And this can be an extraordinarily difficult franchise to follow along with. We're talking about multiple movies over multiple languages and multiple continents, and a lot of these movies are vignettes that do time hopping back and forth. There's a lot going on here, and a lot of people have difficulty following it, so please, let me be your guide as we walk through the entirety of Ju-on. Now, before we go ahead and jump right into the deep end of the pool here, I do want to clarify right at the start what this video will be and what it won't be. I won't be covering any of the Ju-on material that didn't show up on a screen, so anything like manga, comic books, I'm not really going to be tackling those, but anything that was on a screen is going to be looked at here. So that includes every single short film, straight-to-video release, theatrical release, and the Netflix series. Secondly, I know that I typically do spoiler-free reviews, but I'm going to say that I'm going to get into kind of some spoiler-ish territory because this is a difficult one to really tackle without getting into some finer plot elements. And unfortunately, there is the concept of death. All right, so let me ask you this. How many Grudge or Ju-on movies have you seen? Is it one or more? Well, if so, how many people actually survived in that? Yeah, not a lot. That's the name of the game with this one, is anybody that's on screen will typically go into this cursed place, and anybody that goes into this cursed place is properly fucked. So as far as getting into plot details and trying to avoid who died, it becomes a little bit, well, honestly silly and somewhat impossible. Fact of the matter is, I'm going to be discussing whether or not somebody died, but I will leave the methodology, the surprises, the finer details that might thrill you when you watch these movies. I'm going to leave those out because I do want you to experience those surprises if you choose to. I'm also going to be bucking the trend from a lot of other people's ranking videos, and I'm not going to be doing these in order of preference, but rather order of chronology. I'm going to be talking about these movies as they came out, scoring them, and then having a final tally at the end. Now, this video will have chapter markers, so if you ever want to skip forward at any point, even straight to the end, I don't take offense. Go right ahead. And the only other thing that I want to bring up real quick before we jump in is I am a Westerner. I was born in the United States of America. I don't know a lick of Japanese. I'm going to be doing my absolute best with some pronunciations of names and places and so on and so forth, but if I get anything wrong, please accept my humblest apologies in advance. I don't mean any disrespect by it. I'm simply doing my level best. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, where did all this Ju-on Grudge stuff come from anyway? Well, the genesis of it was the brainchild of writer-director Takashi Shimizu, who in the late 90s was taking a film course taught by legendary director of films like Cure, Kiyoshi Kurosawa. And Takashi must have impressed his teacher because when Kiyoshi was presented with the professional opportunity of writing and directing some segments for an anthology series called School Ghost Story G, he recommended Takashi to also contribute to this. And that's exactly what happened. Takashi went ahead and wrote and directed two very small segments for this anthology series, the first of which was called 444, 444, 4444, and the other was Katasume. Now, Takashi Shimizu really didn't come up with the entirety of Ju-on himself. It actually dates back to some very, very old Japanese lore involving the yurei. Yurei being a blanket term for a lot of different types of ghosts. It's, well, pretty much like what we would consider to be ghost, and there's a lot of subsections contained within. See, when a person dies, their reikon, or soul or spirit, basically leaves the body and then gets put into purgatory where it awaits proper burial rites before moving on. However, a lot can disrupt this process, including dying a violent death or improper burial rites, or even having negative or distracting emotions or thoughts at the time of death, which can often lead to the traditional unfinished business type ghosts. There's the 𝗘𝗾𝗵𝗸𝗀, which is the ghost of children, and oftentimes is not evil, but more just mischievous and playful. There's the 𝗘𝗵𝗪, which is the ghost of a woman that maybe died during childbirth or otherwise just left children behind. And oftentimes that's not evil either. In fact, they'll actually come back and take care of or watch over the children that they left behind. And then there's the Onyo, a vengeful or wrathful spirit, and it will fuck your world up, full of anger and malice and driven by vengeance and rage. Folks, I present to you 𝗘𝗾𝗂𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗀𝗀. Alright, so 4 is one of the 2 short films that Takashi Shimizu wrote and directed for the portmanteau anthology series School Ghost Story G. And in this particular short film, it opens up with us seeing a young man, Tsuyoshi Murakami, riding his bike down an alleyway when he suddenly hears a cell phone ring. After some searching, he manages to find it and sees that the number that is showing up on the display is a bunch of 4s. And this obviously gives Tsuyoshi a little bit of pause. Number 1, where did the cell phone come from? Number 2, the number 4 is actually a sign of bad luck in Japan, being a homonym for death. Regardless, flying in the face of anybody's good sense, he presses answer and holds the phone up to his ear, asking, "Hello, who's there?" And the only thing that he gets on the other end is a cat meowing. Now, most anybody else would have hung up by now, but Tsuyoshi apparently has a little bit of curiosity, so he continues on with the conversation. "Hello? Who's there? Is this a prank? Why are you doing this?" Things like that. And he just continues on the conversation, and every time he gets back one manner or another of a cat that is, in my estimation, basically saying, "Hello, we're calling about the warranty on your car." But he doesn't know that. All he knows is that it's a cat going meow, so on and so forth. And finally, he asks a question relevant to his interest at that point, which is,
"なあ、俺のこと見えてんだろ?"
見てるよ。
Now, we don't know who this young man is quite yet, but he does feature very heavily in the series down the line. Regardless, it is startling to Tsuyoshi, and even more startling is when the young man opens his mouth and lets out a blood-curdling yowl while black goo drips off his forehead. Alright, so I've reviewed short films for this channel before, and I am happy to do so. I enjoy doing so. It actually offers a bit of a unique perspective that is outside of feature-length films. It really doesn't need a whole lot of character development or any kind of arcs or anything along those lines. It gets away with being so short that it just has a hook. And a hook or a concept is sometimes all you need. Granted, when we're talking about a 90-plus minute-long movie, yeah, you do need more than that. A concept is only going to get you so far before the audience really kind of tunes out and falls asleep. But for a short film, especially a film as short as this one, clocking in at only about 3 or 4 minutes long, it's perfect. It's simple, and there's some beauty in that simplicity. Yeah, it's a little bit rough, but we're also talking about the technical achievements and the equipment provided to basically what amounts to a student filmmaker in the late 90s. There is a certain element of, what are you gonna do? But even so, I do think that the angles and the cuts and so forth work in favor of the ending scare that this provides. And now it's time to move on to the second of the 2 short films, Katasume. So in Katasume, which translates to In a Corner, we're introduced to 2 young girls, Hiseo and Kana, who are on summer break, but even so have a shift to feed the rabbits outside of their school, and that's exactly what they're doing. Kana doesn't much want to be there, but regardless, they're there and they may as well get the shift done. So that's what they do, and when they go to check it off, Kana reaches for the clipboard and in her excitement, accidentally cuts her finger on it. So after a little bit of deliberation, Hiseo goes ahead and tries to find a teacher so that she can get a little bandage for it. Now Kana is alone, and once she's alone, then all of a sudden we get an Evil Dead camera zoom up to her, indicating that a monster has rah! After an unknown period of time, Hiseo does come back with the bandage and finds that Kana is missing. Searches around for her for just a little while and then all of a sudden notices something coming out of the bushes, and that is when we get our first on-screen glimpse of Kayako. The blood-stained woman in white who is crawling along the ground and hair drooped over her face is coming after Hiseo quite slowly but quite menacingly, and in a panic, Hiseo grabs a spade and kind of falls backwards into the trash to defend herself, and then notices Kana, who is stirring next to her, blood-soaked and making the same noises as Kayako. Fade to black. Okay, so the notes that I had about the previous segment of lots of fours, I have about this one as well. It is a little bit rough around the edges. You can kind of tell that this is somebody just starting out. But I do think it actually had a little bit more depth to it, if for no other reason than the fact that we had more than one character on screen throughout the majority of this film. So we actually had some interactions, some dialogue, and so forth. Not to mention, although we don't really know this if we're watching these in a chronological order, some of these characters actually bleed through, and especially Kana will show up later on down the road. So this has actually a little bit of an interesting foundational element to this. One of the big complaints about the Grudge series and so on is not only does it hop back and forth in time with every single vignette, but it also introduces characters that may not have actually shown up in the movie you're watching, but rather previous entries. Which is another reason that I'm really glad I'm making this video as kind of a guide throughout this, because a lot of people that are going to be watching Ju-on the Curse and seeing a character on the screen in a particular way isn't going to know who that is, even though it's a landmark moment, unless they know about these two short films. Ju-on the Curse. So I think a lot of people's entry points into this entire series was probably the 2004 American remake The Grudge with Sarah Michelle Gellar and Bill Pullman. But for those of you that want to take that journey further, I think that the next logical step would have been to want to watch the original, and so you kick on Ju-on the Grudge. And that's not necessarily a mistake, great movie, but I do think that there is a better path, and that would be to start with this first real kickoff of a feature-length Ju-on the Curse. There is a lot of discrepancies between Ju-on the Grudge and The Grudge, but I think that watching this one kind of fills in a lot of prerequisite issues that makes watching Ju-on the Grudge a more rich experience. Now, this wasn't a theatrical release, but even so, this was the first real world-building element of Takashi Shimizu's vision, and I think it's a fantastic movie. So like a lot of the entries within this entire world, this is a vignette series, which means it's going to be taking place over several different short stories that kind of get told within the entirety of this storyline arc, and yes, it goes back and forth in time willy-nilly. At first, we get introduced to the Kobayashi family, a husband and his pregnant wife living in apartment 205. That's important. And he's concerned about his pupil Toshio. He hasn't been to school in a little while, so he goes to his house to do a welfare check. And he finds the place in a state of disarray. After he's trying to figure out what's going on here, why is this kid left alone? Why is the house all torn apart and garbage strewn everywhere? Why does he have some bandages on his legs? What actually happened here? Things start taking a little bit of a sinister turn as he's looking out the window and young Toshio behind him meows. Alright, so what's with this whole kid meowing thing? Well, that kind of comes down to a few different theories, both of which are equally plausible in my estimation. One of which is because Toshio was killed alongside the family cat and around the same way, that their spirits or souls merge. The other is an old Japanese lore that says that the spirits of damned children are destined to become strays. It could be neither, it could be both. Who knows? It's kind of a take your pick. But even so, those are two possible explanations as far as why you're curious in terms of this kid constantly meowing through the series. It just happens. After which we go forward in time and look at the new inhabitants of this house, the Murakami family, made up of the mother Noriko, the daughter Kana, who you may remember from the short film Katasume, and the brother Tsuyoshi, who you may remember from the short film Lots of Fours. So this is another element of where everything kind of gets intertwined within one another, so if you have watched the short films, you get a little bit more of that flavor within this one. And we kind of get taken along the ride with them as far as Kana and her tutor, and Kana needing to leave to go feed the rabbits. And her tutor picking up the pieces as far as finding weird stuff in the house from there, as well as the brother Tsuyoshi, who goes missing, and his girlfriend tries to find him at the school. She notices that his bike is there, his bag is there. And when she tries to find him and so on and so forth, weird shit starts happening. At that point, we go to the coroner's office and find two detectives talking amongst each other in front of a covered corpse. And they're talking about how they found this body, so on and so forth. And then they also found an element that doesn't belong to this body, but they are trying to figure out how somebody could be walking around missing this thing and still be alive. Say, you know where would be a fun place to go? Back in time, why not? Because we're going to be picking back up with Mr. Kobayashi as he uncovers new evidence and new storyline elements of Kayako and her journal. As soon as he does, things start escalating in a more dangerous fashion from there, and before he can leave the house, he gets a phone call. Now, without giving any kind of spoilers away, the phone call was, let's just say, less than optimal, and before he can leave the house, we finally get the shot of Kayako crawling down the stairs. It's an iconic scene. It's something that the entire series is built upon. This entire movie franchise is made up of a whole lot of these very iconic visual elements, and it's thrilling to watch this one happen for the first time because it's going to happen again, and it's even going to be played off of later. After that sequence reaches its conclusion, then we get introduced to Kayako and Tatsuya Suzuki, a sister and a brother, the brother of which is a real estate agent who's trying to unload this particular house, but he's having a little trouble doing so. So he enlists the help of his sister, who is a bit of a sensitive, to go in there and try and find out what is there that is prohibiting people from buying. After which, there is a sequence in which she tries some sake, she spits it out, and she explains to him that this sake will be tainted in the presence of spiritual activity, so keep it nearby and make prospective buyers drink it. If they drink it and it doesn't taste like sake, if it tastes off or weird or bad and they spit it out, then they are too sensitive to live in this house. But if they drink it and it's fine, then they are not tuned to this frequency and they will probably be okay to live here. Probably. After which we kind of bounce forward in time just a little bit as he informs her that he did indeed finally sell the house, and yes, he made her go through the sake drink thing. So Kayako goes and pays the house a visit, at least walks by it, and notices a woman in the window. Everything looks fine, but her smile quickly fades as she notices that something about this woman is very off indeed. And at that point, we go ahead and just leave off on a cliffhanger. Now, again, I'm a big fan of this movie. I thought it was great. There was a lot of the Asian horror elements that I just genuinely love. The kind of spiritual creepiness to things, the iconic moments and the lore and the world building that it developed, and the finer details that made that world rich. The whole sake drink thing, that was just an element that really brought things to life. It made everything about this place pop. It's just that little fine-grained detail that causes the audience to really engage with the storyline and with the characters and what's going on here. Additionally, one of just the best moments for me is when Kobayashi is looking out the window and Toshio does his meow thing. It's just one of those elements that when Kobayashi is going through the house, there is kind of a sinister overtone. Something's not right. There's no parents to be found. This kid is kind of cut up with some bandages on his knees. What is going on here? There's garbage strewn around everywhere. This does not feel like a safe place. But you know what? The one element of this that does feel safe? Toshio himself. He's just a little kid. He has cuts on his knees. He's the victim. He was left alone. He's trying to find out as a teacher what happened here so that he can help this kid. And then while he's looking out the window, this one element of safety in his situation becomes menacing. And the thing of it is, he doesn't know that. We do. We are provided information that he doesn't have about his lack of safety in the one thing that he found safety in. That's the kind of thing that just really resonates with me. It really brings the creep factor in a major way. And moreover, it's just fun. So I really rate this one highly. I loved this movie through and through. And if you're a fan of the Ju-on series and you make it a point not to watch The Curse, I don't know what to tell you. This is absolutely required viewing for any Ju-on fan. So this is a pretty weird one for me to kind of try and really describe. Out of an entire 76-minute long runtime, this starts out with 30 minutes of recap. And it's not like it's the sepia tone hashing out what happened before previously on. It's just repeating the last half hour of the first movie. So we literally wind up with just a smidge over half the runtime devoted to actually new elements. But even so, once it does start kicking off with new material, we get put right back where we left off, with the Suzuki family and Kayako noticing the woman in the window. And that's kind of one of the main central focus points there. Tatsuya goes and takes his sister and his nephew, who coincidentally lives in apartment 205, and brings them up to the countryside where they can get rest or treatment or whatever in the old family home alongside their grandparents. After which we cut to the Kitada family, the current residents of the house of Hiroshi and Toshimi, the husband and wife, the woman in the window, respectively. And Hiroshi's being a bit of a dick. He's complaining about breakfast, he's grilling his wife about her whereabouts yesterday, not really believing her, just generally being a bit of an asshole. And then she greets him quite warmly with a frying pan. After which, we go back to Tatsuya Suzuki. He's trying to figure out what happened to Kayako and his family, and he goes and visits the Kitadas at their house to try and isolate a little bit more information, ask them how they're doing generally, things like that, and Toshimi is the one that greets him, and there's a bit of a creepy sequence from there in which Tatsuya is brought into the house, and he slowly realizes that whoever he thought he was talking to, that ain't her. Then we kind of get back brought up with the Suzuki family out in the countryside. Things kind of go, well, let's just say higgledy-piggledy. And then we cut yet again to another sequence. There's actually a series of sequences. There's one involving the detectives and they're talking with one another and, I step foot in the house, that kind of thing. And that reaches its conclusion. And then we get brought back to the nephew, Nobuyuki Suzuki, who is walking on his way to school. And while he's at school, he is, a little bit creepy, a little bit odd. The other students are not quite sure what to make of him. And then looking out the window, he sees Kayako. In his attempt to escape from her, she kind of keeps popping up in impossible ways. He'll run down the corridor from her, open a door, and there she is. Lo and behold, it almost seems like there's a whole lot of her out there. And then we come to find out there actually is. Somebody hit Control-C, Control-V a whole fuckload of times, and we get introduced to a whole courtyard of Kayako's. Now that's the last real segment. We do get a little bit of a glimpse of just the exterior of the house while we hear some girls inside talking to one another. I can't believe we're here. We shouldn't be here. Oh, what's this sake? Man, it tastes weird. Now I gotta say, I really did like this one a significant amount less than the first Ju-on the Curse. But at the same time, I don't really know exactly what to make of it. Let's just go ahead and take that first half hour of runtime thing there, and I'm going to take it off the table. I'm not going to judge this movie based on that. Historically, I have not been a big fan of any kind of horror movie that does a clip show element, Puppet Master Legacy, that kind of thing. But here's the problem with that. I don't really know what the deal is. I looked. I couldn't find any real solid information as far as why this did what it did. This wasn't really released at the exact same time as The Curse, despite not being a theatrical run, but it did have about a month or two in between the releases of the two movies. So why did it go through all this? I honestly just can't say. That could be a situation of a director trying to pad a runtime, in which case I'm not a fan of that and I will deride that. But there also could be, and I fully admit this, a cultural element of distribution practices within the entertainment industry of Japan, and I am unaware of them. For two VOD releases that are going to be happening within a month of each other or 2 months of each other, this could be something that just happens and it's industry standard. But I don't know that. I can't find that information. So I'm just going to take it off the table and just say that gets a bit of a mulligan. So I'm going to look at the remainder of the 46 minutes of runtime here. And doing so, I really can't think of how this really added a whole lot. There were some creepy sequences, I guess. It added a little bit of storyline lore, but I honestly wasn't nearly as interested in any of this as I was the element of the first movie. The scares didn't land as much, the storylines weren't as interesting, and I really just couldn't establish how much this actually added to things. By no means did I think this was bad, it just kind of felt like it was. And in the shadow of the first movie, which I really did love and I do think is iconic, that's not a really great follow-up to have happen there. So I'm not going to go out and say you should skip this one. I'm just saying maybe keep your expectations in check. I think it was a little bit fun, it was a little bit interesting, but didn't nearly live up to the promise of the first film. And here we are, Ju-on the Grudge. So this is the first of the movies that actually had a theatrical run, and this is also where you can really start to see Takashi Shimizu really come into his own as a director, really start honing and refining his craft. There's a lot of really fun elements in this that you can tell influence his career path down the road, from the remainder of the Grudge movies to Marabito. And just like the previous entries, this one is also a series of vignettes that travel back and forth in time, hopping from one family to the next, so on and so forth. And to get things started, we get introduced to the character of Rika, who is a social worker that is a volunteer at the service she works for, and she is tasked with taking on an assignment that's probably out of her league, but they are out of options. Somebody has been a no-call, no-show, and she is forced to go do a welfare check at this particular house. And so that's where she goes to visit the old Saeki homestead and do a welfare check on grandmother Sachi Tokunaga. And in a familiar turn of events, she goes there and finds that Sachi has been left alone, the house is in disarray, and she doesn't know what's going on. She investigates the house further to find that the upstairs closet has been taped off and there is scratching coming from within. When she opens the door, a cat leaps out and it kind of distracts her until she finally notices that also in there is young little Toshio. The sequence continues playing out from there until it reaches its intermediary conclusion, and then we go back in time to visit the remainder of the Tokunaga family. We go down a bit of dark territory with the husband and wife of Katsuya and Kazumi as they are influenced by the house in one terrible fashion or another. And we even get introduced to Katsuya's sister Hitomi Tokunaga as she briefly steps inside the house to check up on things before Katsuya kicks her out. And then we have one of the more iconic sequences of her going back to her apartment building, only to be followed by this Ju-on curse. This is the sequence in which we have the big elevator ride and Toshio showing up in the window under each floor. And then if you're familiar with the franchise at all, the under the covers sequence as well. Then we cut to the next vignette where we're introduced to the characters of a father and his young daughter, Yuji and Izumi Toyama, as they are approached by a man in a suit who introduces himself as Detective Igarashi. And Igarashi is asking Yuji questions because he is currently assigned to the case of this house. He's hit a bit of a dead end and he needs more information. So he's going to the previous detective that was working on this case. Yuji insists that he's retired. He doesn't want anything to do with it, especially when he finds out what case they're referencing. He just doesn't want a part of it. Even so, he does kind of get wrangled into it in one fashion or another until finally he has had enough and he knows that this house just needs to go. So he shows up with some gas canisters and tries to burn the place down. But before things reach their natural conclusion, he has a bit of a vision while inside the house. Night turns to day, he hears voices upstairs of young girls until one of them runs down the stairs. The conversation that he hears is obviously the last trailing element of Ju-on the Cursed 2, that last sequence where we saw the outside of the house and the conversation happen within. And then we go forward in time again, this time actually a significant amount because we're catching back up with the young girl Izumi Toyama as she is mourning the loss of her father. She has clearly gone through some stuff and she is also missing some classmates. You see, she's hanging out with her friends, but at the same time she's also passing by these poster boards which have missing persons notices on them, and clearly she's associated with them in one fashion or another. And the remainder of that vignette is associated with her suffering her repercussions as well as missing her father. So this movie had a lot going for it, and I honestly think that for me, at the very least, it's on par with Ju-on the Curse. I think that they both have their pros and cons, and they kind of offset one another. The blemishes that Ju-on the Curse has is made up for with its storyline and world building, whereas I think this one is more polished, but does need a little bit more work in that storytelling regard. There's some fun little facts about this one, like when Rika shows up at the Tokunaga house to visit Sachi, she explains that she is there filling in for Takahashi. Now, Takahashi actually doesn't show up as a character in this series at all. However, Hiroshi Takahashi, the actual screenwriter of great films like Ringu, actually helped Takashi Shimizu develop the world-building elements of this. When he was tasked to actually make a theatrical run feature-length movie, he was one of the people that lent a hand and helped him develop this. I think there were a lot of really great elements and some very good scares and creepy moments to happen within this. Again, you can really see Takashi really start to come into his own as a director. I enjoyed this through and through, and this also caught the eye of Sam Raimi, which would lead to the future of the series. So all in all, there was a lot of acclaim for this film. It was finally a series that was no longer being overlooked. The short films that showed up in Schoolgirl Story G were praised, but not really mainstream. Ju-on, The Curse 1 and 2, again, praised, but not really blown up. This was the big moment in which things really started to get seen by the public, not just in Japan, but internationally. This was the film, more than any other, that put Takashi Shimizu on the map. Ju-on the Grudge 2. 2003 movie, and it would be the last of the Ju-on series made strictly for Japan that Takashi Shimizu would be making. However, it is far from the last in the series, and far from the last time that he would be directing a Grudge movie. I personally found this one to be a little bit, interesting. Okay, fine, yes, there's some interesting elements to it. It does add some flavor and some flair to the lore, but I would be lying if I said that I liked it nearly as much as the first Ju-on Grudge or Ju-on the Curse. However, when we're talking about ghosts and spirits and so on and so forth, one of the more logical places that things kind of go, especially once we start getting into sequels of sequels, is them wanting to integrate into the real world. And to do so, there's a few different avenues that we can go down. There's possession, there's ritual rites, there's also cursed pregnancies. And that's exactly the avenue we head down when we get introduced to the character of Kayako Harase as she's driving home with her fiancé. He hits something in the middle of the road, gets out, finds out that it's a black cat. Things kind of develop from there. As they continue driving on down the road, Toshio gets involved and they wind up having an accident. Now, one of the things that we discover in the dialogue before the crash is that Kayako is a horror film actress. And after the crash, she recovers. She's afraid that she lost the baby, but it turns out she didn't. But her fiancé is in a coma. While she's visiting her fiancé, she sees Toshio, who then comes up and touches her stomach. After that, that leads into kind of some investigation. Did I have an unborn brother? Things like that. She's trying to trace down who this is until she believes that it is the spirit of her unborn child. We then cut a little bit into the future and find Kayako working on a film playing a teacher, and one of the extras playing a student is Chiharu, who is a character, one of the friends from the last segment of the previous film, Ju-on the Grudge. And so this all kind of gets wrapped together when Kayako goes to work on a horror TV program called Heart-Stopping Backgrounds as a guest as they investigate this haunted house. Guess which one? All of the people of this production, including Megumi, the hairstylist, all get affected in one way or another by this house and this curse and so on. And it further explores what happens when, if the curse is born from somebody dying a violent death, well, what happens when the ghost of this curse kills somebody in a violent way? Now, they too have a violent death, and the way that this can kind of perpetuate and trickle down. And just like the previous film, we kind of have moments in which we isolate a moment in time to devote to a character as we investigate what happens to them and how they are being affected by the curse of this house, leading towards a creepy and oftentimes mortal conclusion. The ultimate conclusion of this film obviously coming into the birth of Kyoko's child, which turns into a whole fucked up thing in its own right. Now again, I didn't really enjoy this one as much, but I do have to admit that it does have some good world building elements and some good scares and some good, individual modular ideas and notions and moments without actually working quite as well as a whole. The whole notion with the cursed pregnancy and the fucked up delivery and so on was really kind of cool in its own way. This was also one of the first notions that kind of leaned into the hair segment of everything, meaning that a lot of these onyos and the world that this has kind of evolved from with the Grudge and the Ring and so on and so forth, all of which involving a girl that has hair drooped over her face, and hair being a major component of this, hair now being almost weaponized in this film. And there was also a really good sequence as far as somebody hearing thumping coming from the wall. The only problem is they live in a corner apartment. That wall doesn't go anywhere. There's nobody behind it, but a thumping still happens from there from time to time in the wee hours of the morning, and then the ultimate conclusion of how that story wraps up was pretty chilling indeed. But again, just because it worked on an individual modular level doesn't mean that it works as an entire film. And honestly, one of the things that as much as I love Asian horror films, I do have to admit that one of the big faults of it is it will often go so far into detail that we'll wind up getting lost in its own lore. And I start to see the beginnings of that here. I, at this point, with this movie, start to have the splinter of a thought. It's one of those nebulous things that I really don't have any words for yet, but I promise I do get to them. It's about The Grudge 3, the third American remake there, that I finally find the words to go with this thought. But this movie was the first little nugget of it starting to splinter in my brain, and when I find the words, it actually makes a whole lot of sense, but I'll get to that in a bit. I wanted to point out that this was one of the moments that that thought first started splintering in my head. And here we are. Again, a lot of people's first entry point into the series, the 2004 movie, The Grudge. Also directed by Takashi Shimizu. However, this time it was for worldwide audiences, bringing American actors into the world, but still keeping the setting in Japan and keeping a lot of that Japanese flair. So it provided an interesting little bridge for a lot of movies that were being remade. It still kept a lot of source material intact. Now, a lot of people are going to be expecting me to make this like the big segment of the series, but honestly, it's going to be far from the truth, because the fact of the matter is, this was an interesting watch, but it's all been covered before. Now, although some people would argue with this statement, I do have to say that this was so far the most linear and easy to follow storyline of the series. But it's not in any way a direct one-to-one remake of Ju-on the Grudge. In fact, it pulls components from the entirety of the Ju-on franchise so far to make this kind of amalgam movie that is more accessible for Western audiences. We start out that way with more of a one-on-one remake with Sarah Michelle Gellar playing Karen instead of the Rika character as the social worker that needs to check in on the family. But there were a lot of elements of Ju-on the Grudge that didn't make it into this movie at all, including the entirety of the Toyoma storyline, as well as a lot of the elements of the storyline of like Ju-on the Curse that established a lot of those origin stories of Kayako's obsession with the teacher and so forth were brought into this one. And instead of having a lot of vignettes hopping back and forth, there was some hopping back and forth to be sure, but even so, it brought it forward in a lot more of a, easy to follow linear method. While flashbacks are happening, it's happening in a way that's kind of integrated into the present narrative and the present storyline through the use of visions, as opposed to simply strict cuts, title card, moving on to 5 years prior before then the next vignette where we happen 8 years in the future, things like that. So yeah, it is a little bit easier to follow, and it does, in all honesty, take some of the best moments of the previous 4 films to kind of compile together here. So although I would say that this is Asian horror light, kind of falling in an in-between status of still having very much an Asian horror feel to it, while not being a full-on westernized remake, I think that I can see where audiences were really falling in love with it, and I'm honestly one of them. It has that kind of unique flair and that unique tone, while also having the refinement of having 4 films previously done and being able to cherry pick characters and storylines to make the cut into this one. So a lot of the issues, as far as what I mentioned before, as far as a lot of Asian horror films getting lost in their own lore, this had the benefit of some editorializing. Before we get into The Grudge 2, there are 2 things that need to be addressed. See, Universal was so happy with the success of The Grudge that they obviously wanted to go for a sequel. I mean, why not? But at the same time, they also wanted to drum up a little bit of, fervor for that sequel. So they came up with the idea to have a couple of compilations of shorts in anticipation of this to really just get the people excited for The Grudge 2. The first of which was Tales from the Grudge. So Tales from the Grudge is basically just 3 little vignettes of hotel, school, house. And each one kind of takes the baton and passes it to the next as they just kind of go through some little scary moments that have to do with Kayako or some general curse of the grudge befalling the characters. So they'll have a phone call and pass the baton to the person that they're having the phone call with, and they'll be covered in the next segment. Honestly, there's really not a whole lot of meat to this. It's up on YouTube. Watch it if you want to. I really wouldn't advocate against it, but if I did have to come up with a word that describes how I was feeling about things, it would be gimmicky. Everything about this felt really gimmicky. There was no meat on these bones. I guess the same could be said in some ways for Katasume and a lot of Force, but at the same time, that was, establishing the world, and that was designed to be kind of part of an anthology series. It was supposed to be kind of just a little spooky short, whereas this was more of a publicity stunt, and gimmicky. I'm really not rating this one too highly. I didn't think a whole lot of it, but it was certainly better than the next one. The Grudge 1.5. I honestly don't even really know where to go with this. So this is another compilation of shorts that are kind of broken up into 4 segments, and each one of those has this, I don't know. On a plotline level, there's really just not a whole lot here. This kind of has some bridging characters between the first and second movie. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because I think what happened here is Universal saw the success of The Matrix and the Matrix sequels. Let's just go ahead and take that conversation for another time. But I think they also saw the success of the Animatrix leading up to the sequels and the level of audience and critic ravings for the Animatrix. And I think that they wanted to capitalize on that, integrate it into this with probably 1/1000th of the effort. The plot is it's absolutely nothing special. I'm not even really going to get into it, but I just want to point out that whatever faults the plot may have could have possibly been forgivable if the animation hadn't been as absolutely god-awful, terrible as it was. It was the worst Newgrounds-esque Flash animation bullshit ever. It was the kind of thing where you can have a completely static frame of a character that is kind of doing a zoom and pan over a static background, and their mouth is not moving. It's a single frame, literally. It does not move aside from just the pan and zoom against the background, while the actor playing the voice, still is making audible dialogue while the mouth isn't moving.
I'm at your office. Where are you?
It's just awful. I honestly don't know how. I've been at this review thing for several years, and I'm just kind of starting to come up to I don't know how many other ways to say the word bad. It's bad. It's up on YouTube if you want to watch it. It's mercifully short, but yeah, I'm certainly not going to recommend it. Holy shit. So this movie is made up into 3 parts: Aubrey, Allison, and Jake. The Aubrey segment is basically picking up where the last film left off, with Sarah Michelle Gellar in the hospital being accused of setting the fire at the 𝗘𝗾𝗂𝗶𝗽𝗺 house. So her sister Aubrey flies from America and tries to get Karen out of Japan, bring her back home, bring her somewhere safe. And of course, things don't go as planned. She gets wrapped up into this whole storyline. This segment in particular decided to go, in my opinion, a pretty poor direction, but almost a logical one. You see, when we're going down the road of these sequels, one after another, there's only so many different places you can go. You can dive into the lore until you're lost in a maze of what-ifs and details, and you're just getting completely bogged down into this world. Or you can try to start explaining things a little bit more, having a little bit more exposition behind the storyline and so forth. And that's the direction that this movie chose to go, actually having an investigation and bringing up Kayako's mom and so on and so forth. The whole thing just felt like, not at all scary. That's the thing, is when we're talking about horror movies, the more you explain, the less scary it inherently is. And that's one of the sad, unfortunate side effects of having multiple sequels is, where else are you going to go? It kind of makes logical sense. You want to provide more information. You want to dig deeper into things, so you need to get further back or talk about this character more and explain things more. But by doing so, you're inherently diluting the lore. But taking that and shelving it for the moment, then we get into the Allison segment, in which a schoolgirl is basically bullied into going into the house. Things kind of erupt from there. There's some good creepy moments that actually happen within this one, and hats off to it for that. And then we get to the third segment of Jake, where the Allison character from the previous second installment gets brought back home to her apartment building in Chicago, and things start affecting the residents of that apartment building from there. And that, I think, is honestly the second big misfire of this particular movie. Not only did the first segment really go way too in-depth in explaining things and diluting the lore, but then we started to actually take some of the big components of what made this film series work so far and strip it away, one of which being the geography. For me, the country of Japan was just as much a character of this story as Mr. Kobayashi, Kana, or even the Seiki house. And it's pretty clear the direction that they wanted to take this in, which was get it out of Japan. I honestly think that that was just a big mistake, and it's one that follows through continually as the American movies go on. So what's the solution here? I mean, if I'm going to be complaining about how further explanation of characters and their storyline and their backgrounds and so forth is going to dilute the lore and make things less scary and make things less interesting, while at the same time also harping on the notion of bringing it out into fresh territory and changing the setting and everything, well, what's my solution? Honestly, stop. And it feels weird to say because I'm critiquing the 10th segment of an 18-segment franchise so far. But yeah, I think that, honestly, with the success of the first American Grudge movie, they probably should have stopped. Or at the very least, given it a whole lot of time. It's the natural thing. Yeah, that made a fuck ton of money. It was a wild success, critically and commercially. And of course they wanted to make a sequel. But it's just the trappings of the sequel. Nobody ever really thought that maybe it should just not happen. Yes, because there's money to be made there, it's going to completely drive the decision. But from an artistic standpoint, from a critical standpoint, which is where I'm coming from standing here in front of this camera, I don't really think it should have. I think it should have been stopped. I really think that there really wasn't a whole lot of other places for this to go. But let's find out where they go from here. The Grudge 3, the 2009 movie where the directorial reins were finally handed over, this time to Toby Wilkins. We pick back up where we left off, this time following the Jake character, until we get back to the apartment building in Chicago. Now, in the entirety of the series, this is actually the first one that takes place within a linear storytelling fashion. There's not any real time jumps hopping back and forth. This is simply getting us from opening credits to end credits in a straight line. So between that and being completely set in America, I gotta be honest, this is the first movie of the series that to me doesn't at all feel like Ju-on or The Grudge. I think for me, there's a sense of being lost that's kind of infused within this franchise, a sad loneliness that's almost part of its makeup, and that's not here. Additionally, even though it's set in Chicago, it was filmed in Bulgaria, and good luck with any kind of exterior shots that are going to play well on that level, which means that we are pretty much isolated to the interior of this apartment building throughout the entirety of the movie. So the film feels very, I don't know, constrictive without actually feeling claustrophobic. And further, we actually go even deeper down the rabbit hole of getting into some really just drawn out explanations for why people are the way they are, what happened with this backstory. So the previous film, we got into the whole thing with Kayako and her mother and so on. Well, now we're bringing her sister into the fold, because why not? The whole thing is just getting so much exposition and so much backstory and so much explanation that everything is completely watered down at this point. Just to kind of touch on the plot point, the movie revolves around a trio of siblings, an older brother and sister that are tasked with taking care of their younger sister, who is having some lung conditions. She's not in the greatest of health. The older sister wants to move away, go to New York, where the older brother is tasked with maintaining this apartment building and getting new residents signed up to live there. and he's just struggling, trying to find any which way to make this work because the apartment building, stuff's happening to it. Characters died in it. In the previous film, there's a whole lot of fallout happening and not a whole lot of rent money coming in, so there's just this struggle going on. Meanwhile, this cursed element is still in play, and they're having to deal with that. So I think about the best thing that I can say for this movie is also about the worst thing that I can say for a film in the Ju-on franchise, and that's that this feels very much like a competent, well-shot, generic American horror movie mess. Now, if you recall, a while back, I actually mentioned that I had this splinter of a thought enter into my brain, this nebulous thing without form or words that I could really put any kind of vocabulary behind. Well, I actually managed to form it in this one when one particular scare happened, and I'm not even really going to get into that scare. It's really kind of incidental. The fact is, it inspired the words to come forth. As a human species, biologically, physiologically, whatever, we actually have three major responses to fear: fight, flight, and frozen. And we experience in this film a whole lot frozen. Something happens, a character shows up on the screen, Kayako is making her slow crawl down the stairs, somebody witnesses something really terrifying, and they are frozen in place. They may back away very, very slowly, plenty of time for whatever they're watching to catch up to them. But yeah, it's basically they're so scared they can't move. Every once in a while, we get a character that actually establishes the flight response, in which case they are bolting, but it doesn't really do them any good because of the nature of this curse. Not once so far has anybody exhibited the fight response, and I just think that that was kind of weird. At this point, we are several movies into this, and that is a major real response. It's instinctive. It's not anything well thought out. Your logical brain hasn't had time to process anything. It happens in the split second. Why the fuck hasn't anybody lobbed some haymakers?
No, probably.
I honestly just would have loved to have seen it. You know, Kayako pops up. Like I said, that was just my thought. Couldn't really shake it, but there I found the words for it. Anyway, yeah, this movie is pretty unremarkable. It's pretty generic. It's very Americanized. There's not a whole lot really going on here, but I don't know. It was decent enough. It was competent enough. I wouldn't say at all that this was a bad movie. It just felt very odd and very much not fitting this franchise. Time to get back to the roots. In 2009, in Japan, straight-to-video releases were done of two movies, Ju-on White Ghost and Ju-on Black Ghost. And although when you buy them in a DVD, it's usually combined together, White Ghost and Black Ghost, I am going to be doing them as two different segments because, well, honestly, three different reasons. The first of which, they each have their own unique IMDb page. Second, each one is about an hour long, so although they're not really a short film, it's also not quite feature length. I don't know. It kind of put it in this weird place of I wasn't really quite sure, but it really didn't feel like it was working well as kind of cramming them together. And the third reason is because of exactly that. It didn't feel like it was really cramming them together. They were two very isolated kind of segments from one another. But the overall theme of both of them is kind of addressing a lot of the concerns that I've raised thus far in the last few movies. First of which, we're back in Japan. I think that's just the right call for these movies. Second, it's also getting away from a lot of the exposition and a lot of the explanation that they did exhaustively of this lore by taking the concept of the Onyo and the curse, but also taking it away from the Saeki house and from Kayako and so on. It's establishing a completely different set of storylines with completely different characters. The only bleed-through characters in here are a brief cameo by Toshio and the black cat Mar, which I honestly think is the right way to go. I mentioned that I think, honestly, the best thing that they could have done is stop, and this is essentially doing exactly that. It's taking the overall concept and moving forward with it, but for the storyline that they had been working on and developing over the course of several movies, it's finally hitting the stop button, pulling back, acknowledging that those still exist, but trying something different, something fresh, something new, totally different direction. And another way this kind of gets back to the roots is by reestablishing the non-linear storytelling. This hops back and forth within time. It has several vignettes to it. We finally are back to having Ju-on movies feel like Ju-on movies. Now, the real question is, did it work? So generally, the plot of this one revolves around the 𝗘𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗀 family, the father of which is possessed by a spirit from a mirror, and his behavior starts changing in dangerous and erratic ways. We find out the extent of that as the storytelling goes. It's one of those things where, because it's not linear, we sometimes find out the devastation of the extent of things long after the events have actually happened, once they get fully fleshed out and explained, and it's pretty gruesome. And after all of that goes down and shakes out, the delivery boy comes to drop off a cake to the household, where he starts getting tormented by the ghosts and starts taking home some shit there. So this has some interesting ideas to it. It expands on the whole notion of if you're killed by somebody that's already possessed, do you become possessed? Do you become a vengeful spirit? So on and so forth. It really takes that to another level, as well as really exploring some dark territory that the previous films had not actually delved into yet. But that's not to say that this movie was a magical triumph. It was actually held back by quite a lot, not the least of which was a big budget constraint. Sometimes a movie can feel small and intimate and cozy and it works in its favor, and sometimes a movie can just feel cheap. And honestly, this movie kind of falls into the latter category for me. The digital filming style was pretty harsh and honestly almost distractingly so. Just a lot of components about it really didn't gel for me. I think the writing was actually not too bad, but the technical aspects of this did hold it back. That being said, the idea of going back to the roots and figuring out what more they could do with the concept of the vengeful spirit within this world, I tip my hat to it. I think it was a step in the right direction. I wish it had fleshed out better, but what are you going to do? Let's find out if Black Ghost is any better. Okay, no, it doesn't get any better, at least in my opinion. I honestly think this one was a fair bit worse. Here's the thing, is from a plot point perspective, it goes down some really weird rabbit holes that I wasn't necessarily terribly on board for, like being haunted and then possessed by the spirit of an unborn twin, all the medical procedures to try and figure out what's going on from there, so on and so forth, the neighbors being affected by things. I don't know. It just didn't work for me. And from a writing perspective, the meat wasn't there. And from a technical perspective, it had all the same faults as Ju-on White Ghost. So even though I was really glad to see the series start to kind of like get reined back in and explore a little bit more of this territory without beating the dead horse of the 𝗘𝗾𝗂𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗀 family and Kayako and so on, I'm still not entirely thrilled with the direction that it chose to go. I think for me, what it comes down to is I just really didn't feel a sense of engagement with this movie at all. Nothing about the characters really latched on for me. Nothing about the plot line felt interesting. And ultimately, I just didn't have anything that hooked me. Nothing kept me interested. Nothing kept me glued to the screen. I just kind of watched a movie until the end credits rolled, and that was pretty much it. And although I can really say a lot of things about a bad movie, there's not a whole lot worse things than I can say about a boring movie. So whether it's a good idea or not, apparently we're continuing on. 2014, Ju-on, the beginning of the end. And this is the first time within the Japanese releases that this is doing a full-on reboot. We're getting back into the story of Kayako and so on, but it's turning everything on its head. It's changing up a lot of the backstory and the lore, and I'm not entirely sure that the changes that it made are for the best. You know what? Scratch that. I am sure they aren't for the best. But even so, okay, so there's a lot of changes that actually happen with this one. First of which, prior to this, Toshio, cute little kid, pale, walking around in his BVDs, meows, sure. But up until this point, he had been, well, not really directly evil. He was startling, he was creepy, he scared people, sure. But never really have we actually seen him attack anybody or act aggressively necessarily. A lot of people even thought up until this point that he was just more of a cautionary character, that he was just tied hip to hip with Kayako, even trying to warn people away. I don't necessarily think it goes quite that far, but I do think that he was a bit more of just a passive jump scare element that was kind of this cute, creepy little kid that popped up here and there. And that changes with this movie. And not only that, but the movie actually changes the lore behind him so that he is no longer Kayako and Teiki's son. In fact, he had died in the house prior. His family had neglected him, locked him in the closet, left him to die, and now his spirit is inhabiting things. So when Kayako and her husband move into the house and she really wants to have a kid, but by all accounts can't seem to, all of a sudden now we're presented with almost like a cross between a haunting and an immaculate conception deal. I just gotta say it, at this point, I think we're spiraling. This is exactly what I was afraid of and why I said at the 10 segment mark that this should stop. Honestly, nothing that I've seen since that moment has really been worth the watch. Not all of them have been terrible. Not all of them have even been bad. But the real question is, in this continuity that has been so good up until that point, how much have they actually contributed in any positive way to the franchise? And to that, I have to say, not very much. And by all accounts, with this continuation of this 2014 movie and this reboot attempt, it's not getting any better. We're going the wrong way. This actually does fix a lot of the technical issues that were present in Ju-on, White Ghost, and Black Ghost. It actually feels more theatrical. It feels more cinematic. It feels a lot less like a really cheap soap opera that was filmed on a $50 budget. But that doesn't make up for the really lackluster storyline, and honestly, just nothing about it really worked for me. Not only are we going back to tried and true, but honestly exhausted characters, but we're going back to them and flipping them on their head in such a way that betrays their original intent. And I know what a lot of people are going to say out there. Mike, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't want something that is unique and fresh and something that contributes well to the franchise while still continuing on. And I say, I know. So stop continuing on. Stop making these movies.
Stop! He's already dead.
It was so good. What are you doing to it? Has it ever really gone well when a franchise establishes the final movie? So this is a direct sequel, continuation of the storyline from Ju-on, the beginning of the end, which I guess this is now the end of the end. And really what it should be called is Ju-on, more of the same. Because that's really all it is just more of the same. We have the sister of one of the main characters from the previous film who's just going through a lot of the same steps. This is again another vignette thing. This is again going over multiple characters, their storyline, what happens when they get affected by this, and then little jump scares from there. Here's the problem at this point is I don't care. I love Ju-on. I love Asian horror. I love all of this, but I've checked out. All of this has just completely run the whole storyline into the ground. It's been come at from every single which way, including turning it on its head. And it's just the same shit now. It's like at this point going down a YouTube rabbit hole. You've watched one video about floral arrangements, and it's fantastic. You had a nice little lark with it. You didn't know that baby's breath could make the other colors pop so much. And then all of a sudden it's just everywhere. It's all over your timeline. You're watching your 45th floral arrangement video. You're watching it with a different voiceover person. You're watching it with different lighting, different camera angles, different flowers, different nationalities. And all of it amounts to not really giving a shit about the concept of floral arrangements in the first place. It's not that I don't care about floral arrangements or Asian horror, far from it. It's just that this particular franchise has been done to death now. It is ground into the dirt. There's really just nothing more that should be explored with this. It should be stopped. And unfortunately, the movies that are coming out aren't really doing a good job of proving me wrong. I would love for something new to come out, for something unique to come out, for something that would revitalize and refresh this and come up with a new angle of attack and make me fall in love with Juon again. But at this point, it's exhausted. I'm not sure it can happen. I would be thrilled if it could. But right now, what's in front of me, this final curse bullshit, this beginning of the end reboot and its continuation of its sequel, I'm not finding it. It's had a lot of opportunities. We've had the Black Ghost, we've had the White Ghost, we've had the Americans try it with their sequels. We've had all sorts of stuff now. And it's just still tired. And the real hell of it is, I know that there's more left that I have to watch. Fortunately, I do think that the next one will have a little glimmer of light. Let's find out. And here I am, like a kid at Christmas. This is what I was talking about. This is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I needed at this point. This is by no means a good movie, but it's so refreshing. When I mentioned that I needed a new angle of attack, that I needed something to show me that this wasn't exhausted, that I wasn't sure if it could be done, this is exactly the point that I was making, is by coming up with something completely fresh and completely new, not just in storyline, not just in characters, but in tone, in concept. It has revitalized things. I feel refreshed. I feel like I'm ready to watch this franchise again. I feel like I love the character of Kayako again. And honestly, that's a big thing, because as much love as I had for her, boy, howdy, was I getting sick of this shit. And what concept is that? I'll tell you. Fun. It's the one thing that was honestly kind of missing from this whole thing, which is fine. But this storyline so far, all of these movies so far, have been dour and somber and muted in tone and sad. It's been characters stumbling ass backwards into romanticism and tragic storylines, sometimes dying right away as a result of it, and sometimes figuring out long arc storylines and then dying as a result of it. But it's always been muted and dour and somber and mournful. And yeah, okay, fine. That's a tough thing to get behind for what, at this point, 13, 14 movies? Jesus. So yeah, the one thing that was missing from this wasn't something that I even thought of as far as the new angle that could be approached, and that was fun. This leaned into the absurdity of the situation, and we finally have a movie in which two iconic characters are going head to head in a final battle, sort of, kind of. So this is kind of a movie that takes place on two paralleling storylines, which kind of makes sense because at some point they do actually intersect. We have the cursed tape storyline of Sadako, and we have the cursed house of Kayako. The Sadako storyline, the cursed tape, is kind of what principally moves the storyline forward. We have two characters that have come across the cursed tape, and for some reason they changed it from 7 days to 2 days. A lot of this movie really kind of takes a lot of the background lore and just sets it aside. It basically, okay, thank you for the setup. We'll take it from here. We're just going to have some fun with this. So yeah, they changed some things willy-nilly. So yeah, 7 days to 2 days. And they're trying to figure out how to save themselves once they realize what this cursed tape is. So they go to their professor, they go through some exorcism ritual rites and so on and so forth, until finally they enlist the help of specialists who then have the idea, what if we take this curse here and face it off against this curse and hopefully cancel each other out. So that's exactly what they do, taking the tape into the 𝗘𝗾𝗂𝗶𝗽𝗺𝗀 house, having it be watched there, and having Kayako battle against Sadako. Again, this isn't a good movie, and I'm not going to make that claim, but it was exactly what I was looking for. It was the palate cleanser I desperately needed at this point. I enjoyed these characters, I enjoyed these storylines, I enjoyed a lot of the back-end elements that really built the foundation of this, Why not just have a situation where we can just have a moment of revelry? You know, acknowledge the absurdity of a lot of the situation and just lean into it, especially the specialists there with their abrasive attitudes and their dialogue and their quick hand movements and so forth, clearly knowing what they're doing, but still very much out of their depth. It was stupid fun, and for the life of me, I really had no idea how much I was longing for stupid fun. All right, Ju-on Origins. This is the 6-part series that was available on Netflix. I'm not going to get into each episode on a point-by-point breakdown. I'm just going to kind of discuss it as an entire unified entity. This was an interesting idea to the approach of things, but I really can't say that I enjoyed the final product very much. So in a way, this was almost like Ju-on Light. It's not meta. It doesn't reference the movies, but I got the strong sense that what it was trying to do was establish a grounded reality that presupposes the movies could be based off of. So we don't have a whole lot of direct, you go into the house, you're going to get attacked by an onyo or any sort of spirit whatsoever, and you're going to get immediately killed. Anything along those lines. It's actually a little bit softer than that. It's more along the lines of you go into the house and you're more traditionally cursed, I guess. Your life is going to take a downward spiral. You're going to be influenced to do bad things. There's going to be more of a subtle hand at the wheel. And while I can appreciate actually kind of taking a step back, taking a high-level concept and bringing it back down to the ground in a more gritty, down-to-earth kind of relatable way, in the end, what I wound up watching was basically 3 hours of shitty people doing shitty things, murdering, so on and so forth. And it was all not necessarily confusing, but it asked way more questions than it answered, and it never really seemed to go anywhere. It didn't really seem to have much of a message or a voice to it. It more just kind of seemed to be, we have these characters here, let's put them in a situation where they can make the worst possible choices and have the worst possible outcome. Click play, click stop, move on to the next one. And I just didn't find anything terribly interesting or endearing or captivating in the slightest by that. A lot of the characters made choices that just seemed to be a real head scratcher for me, so whether or not they were being influenced by an outside force, curse, entity, onyo, whatever, really wasn't clear, and it never became clear. It honestly just kind of seemed like this person is acting against everybody's best interest and against all logic and common sense, so it just felt odd and ill-fitting. We were very much going back to the dour and mournful tone, which I wasn't quite ready to go back there yet. I was happy with the stupid fun, but even so, it was enough of a palate cleanser with Sadako versus Kayako that, okay, I guess we can go back. At least the technical elements of this, I do have to tip my hat to. It looked good, the camera work was decent, the grading of the color was great, the sound design was spot on. A lot of this really did work on a technical level. But again, I just didn't really find a whole lot here, and considering that it was a 6-part series, the thing of it is, I more got the impression that with so much drawn out and so much, not necessarily fluff, but just lack of interesting plot points, I couldn't help but feel like instead of having 6 half-hour segments totaling 3 hours, we could have trimmed the fat, wound up with a little bit more of an interesting, condensed storyline, and just released it as a 2-hour movie. But I guess if you want to watch something for 3 hours in which characters get cursed and then make irrational, illogical, terrible, murderous decisions for the rest of their lives, however long or short that may be, with no real character arcs and no real plot points or conflict or overcoming that conflict, yeah, this might be for you. The Grudge 2020. This is a terrible piece of over-budget Americanized pap that has some decent gore on the screen and absolutely nothing else going for it. Done. Well, that was a real journey. Thank you so much for joining me on this wacky, wild ride. Let's go ahead and take a look at the numbers. In the top 3 spots, in 3rd place, we have Ju-on the Curse. In 2nd place, Ju-on the Grudge. And in 1st place, The Grudge, the first American remake. I think that might be a hot take. I think I'm probably going to be getting a lot of hate mail for this, putting the American remake in the number 1 spot. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the arc there, what we're really seeing more than anything else is Takashi Shimizu really coming into his own. It's refining his craft. You can have all the natural talent in the world, but you still need practice. Ju-on the Curse was his first feature-length movie. The Grudge was his next continuation beyond, well, The Curse 2. And then once he had those done and they were the wild domestic success that they were, all of a sudden at that point, Sam Raimi came on board and there was a big budget and there was a lot more opportunity to apply those skills. So for me, it's not that we're seeing the American remake actually being better than the original Japanese version. It's that we're seeing this director come into his own with each successive film. And now that this has been going on for over an hour, geez, thank you again from the bottom of my heart for watching this. I do appreciate it. I hope more than anything else that I entertained you and I provided a little bit of brightness to your day. That is my ultimate goal. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people around you. Have a great one. I'll see you on the next review. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.